Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. The wind moves differently on Bruny Island. It whistles through the scrub. It tears across the cliffs of Fluted Cape. Down at Adventure Bay, it can make the whole shoreline sound like it's breathing. Slow, steady, indifferent. On March 3rd, 2011, Rachel Funari, an American woman visiting Tasmania, stepped into that landscape and vanished. She's 35, she's alone, and the last confirmed sighting was around 3:30 that afternoon at a small shack beside the start of the Fluted Cape Walking Track. Then, nothing. No phone call, no made it back safe, no trace of where she went next. Days later, when friends realized they hadn't heard from her, a major search began. Land, sea, air, focused on the trails and steep coastline of Bruny Island. Searchers combed dense brushland and cliff edges that drop hundreds of meters. Still, Rachel didn't turn up. Over time, her disappearance became one of Tasmania's highest profile missing persons cases. Let's follow Rachel's life, step by step, into a place where the trail is beautiful, the drop-offs are brutal, and the silence after 3:30 p.m. has lasted for nearly 15 years. If you ask Tasmanians where they go when they want to disappear for a weekend, but in a peaceful way, they'll often say Bruny Island. It sits just off the southeastern coast of Tasmania, close enough to feel accessible, far enough to feel removed. To get there, you drive south from Hobart through farmland and rolling hills, then board a small vehicular ferry that crosses the channel. The crossing takes less than half an hour, but psychologically, it feels much longer. The signal drops, the air shifts, the mainland recedes. And Bruny isn't one island, technically. It's two. North and South Bruny are connected by a narrow isthmus known as the Neck. A thin ribbon of sand with ocean on one side and bay on the other. People climb the wooden lookout stairs at sunrise and sunset to watch light spill over both sides of the island at once. It's one of those quiet communal rituals. Strangers standing shoulder to shoulder in silence, just watching the world change color. The permanent population is small, around 700 people, and fiercely protective of the island's character. Many are artists, oyster farmers, retirees seeking solitude, or families whose ties go back generations. And there's a strong conservation ethic here. This is a place where locals will tell you which roads flood, which beaches are safest, where wedge-tailed eagles nest. It's tight-knit but welcoming in that understated Tasmanian way. Tourism on Bruny Island isn't flashy. There are no giant resorts or neon attractions. Instead, it's built on experience. And people come for the food first. Often they don't even realize they are. Bruny oysters are legendary. Briny, cold, shucked right in front of you at the edge of the water. There's small batch cheese made from cows grazing in sea air. Honey harvested locally. Single malt whiskey aged in coastal humidity. Fresh sourdough, smoked meats, handcrafted fudge. It's rustic but elevated, refined without losing its rough edges. Then there's the wildlife. White wallabies, rare elsewhere, can be spotted here at dusk. Fur seals bask along rocky outcrops. Dolphins arc in the channel. Migratory birds carve patterns through the sky. The island is part of the South Bruny National Park, and much of it remains untamed and protected. The landscapes feel cinematic. Towering dolerite cliffs plunge into the Southern Ocean. Hidden beaches curve like secrets. Mist rolls in without warning. 1 hour the sky is piercing blue. The next, it's slate gray and windswept. It's dramatic in a way that doesn't feel staged. It feels ancient. For travelers, especially international travelers, Bruny Island represents something deeply Australian but removed from the cliches. No red deserts, no big cities, just raw coastline, cold air, and space. It's the kind of destination people choose when they want authenticity. The kind of place someone like Rachel Funari might have circled on a map. Not because it was famous, but because it promised something quieter, slower, more intimate. Adventure Bay, where many visitors base themselves, carries both softness and history. Named in the 18th century during European exploration, it's calm compared to the island's exposed western coastline. The beach is long and walkable. Families swim in there. Hikers start their days there. It feels safe, gentle. From there, the island unfolds into deeper terrain. Bruny attracts hikers who don't want crowded trails, photographers who chase dramatic light, couples on weekend escapes, solo travelers who want space to think. And there's a rhythm here. Wake early, walk, eat something fresh, stand somewhere high, and look out to sea. Repeat. It's easy to imagine why someone would choose it, especially someone traveling far from home. At 35, traveling internationally, Rachel wasn't looking for theme parks or city nightlife. Bruny Island offers something more introspective. It asks you to slow down, to pay attention, to notice wind direction and tide changes, to sit quietly with an oyster in hand and nothing but water stretching beyond you. There's a kind of trust visitors place in landscapes like this. We see beauty and assume safety. We see openness and assume simplicity. Bruny Island invites you into that illusion gently. It doesn't boast, it doesn't overwhelm, it draws you in with understated charm. Homemade signs, farm gates, small boats tied to weathered piers. And yet, beneath the tourism brochures and artisan markets, it remains what it has always been. A wild island at the edge of the Southern Ocean. That duality, the welcoming charm and the raw environment, is part of what makes it so compelling. It's not hard to understand why someone standing on a ferry deck watching the mainland fade would feel like they were headed somewhere special. Not off the grid entirely, just somewhere quieter, somewhere beautiful, somewhere worth the trip. Rachel Funari was born on December 18, 1975, in New York. It was winter, close to the holidays. The kind of birth date that tends to produce people who feel both reflective and expansive. She was raised by David and Phyllis, both clinical psychologists, parents who made careers out of understanding how people think, how they hurt, how they grow. Dinner table conversations in that kind of household aren't small. They're layered, analytical, curious about the inner workings of the world. Rachel grew up in that atmosphere of thoughtfulness and inquiry alongside her sister Nicole. And somewhere between New York winters and academic conversation, she developed a personality that people would later describe as both vivacious and bookish. That's an interesting combination. Vivacious meaning animated, bright, expressive. A friend who lights up the room, who laughs loudly, who says yes to plans. Bookish, meaning inward, contemplative, someone who lives richly inside her own mind. Rachel carried both. She loved Pink Floyd, music that feels cosmic and questioning and slightly restless. The kind of band you listen to on headphones while staring out of a bus window in a foreign country. The kind of music that pairs well with long thoughts and wide landscapes. She had dreams, and more importantly, she chased them. For a period of time, she lived in England, working as a freelance journalist. Now that alone tells you something about her. She didn't just talk about wanting to see the world. She went. She built a life through words, through curiosity, through observation. In 2001, she and her husband made a bold move. They relocated to Canberra, Australia. It wasn't a gap year. It wasn't a vacation. It was a life decision. 2 Americans choosing to start over on the other side of the planet. In Australia, Rachel didn't shrink. She expanded. By 2003, she had founded Lip magazine, a publication targeted at young women and teenage girls. At the time, mainstream teen magazines like Dolly and Girlfriend dominated newsstands. They focused heavily on beauty, celebrity, dating, on how girls should look and who they should impress. Lip was different. It carved out space for young women to think, to question, to write, to explore politics, identity, culture. It was about intellect and agency and possibility. It told girls that their minds mattered, that their ambitions were valid, that they didn't have to shrink themselves to fit a mold. That kind of project doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone believes young women deserve better, and Rachel believed that. In 2005, she became an Australian citizen. Not just a resident, she fully committed. It was an intentional, rooted choice. Australia wasn't a temporary stop. It was home. By 2007, after separating from her husband, she moved to Melbourne to study at the University of Melbourne. Again, she moved forward. New city, new chapter. Reinvention not as a crisis, but as evolution. She was never static. In 2009 and 2010, Rachel merged work and travel in the way only certain personalities can. She moved through places with openness. She wrote about her experiences in a personal blog called The Cafe Diaries, a fitting name. Cafes are those in-between spaces in cities around the world. Temporary, intimate, observational, perfect for a writer. The blog wasn't just a creative expression. It was a connection. It allowed her family and friends to follow her movements, to know where she was, to share what she was seeing. It was a thread back home. Around this time, Rachel also became actively involved in couchsurfing, a global online community built around hospitality and cultural exchange. Members host one another, show each other their cities, form friendships across continents. For Rachel, this wasn't risky. It was aligned with who she was. She made friends easily. She trusted people. She enjoyed arriving somewhere new with very few plans, preferring to rely on conversations, recommendations, shared meals, spontaneous detours. She wasn't rigid. She was relational. Some travelers obsess over itineraries. Rachel seemed to travel through connection. At the time of her disappearance in 2011, she was working in the department of the Premier of Victoria, a serious, respected role. She was also expecting a phone call about a possible new journalism job, another opportunity on the horizon, another step forward. She was 35 years old, established but still exploratory, grounded but still adventurous. A woman who had already lived internationally, launched a magazine, changed citizenship, shifted careers, built communities online and off. When we talk about Rachel Funari, it's important to understand that she wasn't drifting. She wasn't lost in life. She was building something, always. And maybe that's part of what makes her story so haunting. Because when someone who lives expansively, who says yes to the world, who believes in human connection, who writes and listens and creates space for others, steps out into a beautiful place like Bruny Island, it doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like exactly the kind of thing she would do. A ferry ride, a hike, a new corner of the country she had chosen as home. And somewhere between New York winters, Pink Floyd albums, magazine editorials, university lectures, cafe blog entries, and spontaneous couchsurfing friendships, Rachel Funari became a woman who believed the world was something to move through openly. She had already crossed oceans. She had already reinvented herself. And in early March 2011, she set out once more, into a landscape that felt, on the surface, like possibility. On March 1st, 2011, Rachel Funari boarded a Tiger Airlines flight from Melbourne to Hobart. It wasn't an impulsive trip. She had a return ticket booked for March 8th. 1 week in Tasmania, a small adventure before returning to work, and possibly a new journalism opportunity she was waiting to hear about. In a practical, almost symbolic gesture, she left her primary cell phone behind with her friend Kara Bradley. If that long-awaited job call came through while she was out of service range, Kara could answer. Rachel carried a second mobile phone instead and left the number behind, just in case. It was such a Rachel thing to do. Independent but thoughtful, adventurous but responsible, making space for possibility without dropping the thread of her real life. She arrived in Hobart around 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1st, where she was picked up by Dean Hunterup, a couch surfing contact she had arranged to stay with in Sandy Bay. For 2 nights, she was just another traveler in Hobart, chatting, exploring, settling into the rhythm of somewhere new. On Wednesday afternoon, March 2nd, she struck up a conversation at a cafe with a man named Gordon Young. And that's how Rachel traveled, not through strict itineraries, but through conversations. In that cafe, she mentioned her plan to visit Bruny Island. And Gordon just happened to be going the next morning with his 13-year-old daughter. He offered her a ride if she could meet him early. They exchanged contact details. It was simple, casual, the kind of thing that happens when you move through the world with openness. Later that afternoon, Rachel went to Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art at Bairdale, after posting an invitation on her couchsurfing profile to meet up with others there. She was weaving connections the way she always did, turning a city into a network of faces and stories. The next morning, March 3rd, she quietly left a handwritten note at Dean's house saying she was heading out and intended to return the following week. At around 8:20 a.m., she arrived at Gordon's house. Together, they drove toward Kettering to catch the Bruny Island ferry, stopping along the way to buy fruit and vegetables. It was raining. The sky was low and gray. Heavy rainfall was forecast for the coming days. And during the drive, Rachel mentioned she planned to camp on the island. She had a small tent with her in her backpack. Concerned about the weather, Gordon offered something generous: the use of his family's shack on Bruny Island. She could stay there as long as she needed. Just lock up when she left and hang the key on a hook in the outdoor toilet. So at 9:30 a.m., they boarded the ferry. By 10 a.m., they were at the Bruny Island Cheese Company. They stopped briefly to see a friend. They visited the Adventure Bay store, where Rachel purchased groceries and a disposable Kodak camera. That detail always feels poignant. In 2011, disposable cameras were already relics, but she bought one anyway. A way to document cliffs, coastline, moments, a week of quiet adventure. They stopped by the Adventure Bay Boat Tours office. Gordon left a message for a man named Mr. Shuppers to contact him. At around 11:30 a.m., they arrived at the shack. Gordon showed Rachel how everything worked: the water pump, the amenities, where to leave the key. They had lunch together. It felt ordinary. At around 2:30 p.m., Mr. Shuppers arrived. They discussed the possibility of a boat tour. Nothing was finalized. He mentioned the nearby Fluted Cape Walking Track, a highlight for tourists. And then he left around 3:30 p.m. Shortly after, Gordon and his daughter also departed to catch the ferry back to the mainland. Rachel told Gordon she would be returning to Melbourne on March 8th, but she didn't say how long she planned to stay on Bruny Island. As Gordon drove away, leaving her at the shack in Adventure Bay, it was mid-afternoon on March 3rd, 2011. That was the last confirmed sighting of Rachel Funari. The following day, Gordon's friend, Miss Higgins, stopped by the shack. It was locked. The water pump was still running. The key wasn't on the hook in the outdoor toilet where Rachel had been told to leave it. Miss Higgins wrote a message for Rachel on a board outside. No one yet knew anything was wrong. Back in Melbourne, life moved forward until it didn't. On March 9th, Kara Bradley received a message on Rachel's primary phone, the one Rachel had left behind, saying her work had been rescheduled and asking where she was. Kara realized she hadn't heard from Rachel. She called Rachel's flatmate, Alicia Carino. Alicia confirmed Rachel had a return flight booked for March 8th, but when they checked, Rachel had never boarded that flight. Concern hardened into fear. They contacted the Tasmania police. On the evening of March 10th, with still no word, a formal missing person report was filed at Caulfield Police Station in Victoria. It was forwarded to Tasmania police the next morning. At that point, authorities didn't know where Rachel had gone after Hobart. Then, on March 12th, the Mercury newspaper published an article seeking information. Gordon saw it and immediately contacted police, explaining that he had driven Rachel to Bruny Island and left her at the shack on March 3rd. Police immediately went to the shack. Inside, they found Rachel's backpack and her tent, still packed, undisturbed. The bed had not been slept in. The bathroom appeared unused. The dishes and food Gordon had left on the bench and in the refrigerator were still there, spoiled. Missing were only a few items: her disposable camera, a small shoulder bag, and some clothing, likely what she was wearing when she stepped out that afternoon. It suggested something chillingly simple. She arrived, she put down her backpack, and shortly after 3:30 p.m., she left. The search quickly narrowed to Bruny Island. Land, sea, air. State Emergency Service volunteers scoured the bushland. Marine police and divers searched the waters below the cliffs. The NSW Police Cadaver Dog Unit assisted. Helicopters equipped with infrared technology swept over the island at night, scanning for heat signatures. Volunteers walked the Fluted Cape track in grids. Climbers scaled sections of cliff face so steep and exposed they required rope training. Police divers searched the waters at the base of those 272-meter cliffs, places where currents could pull a body far from shore. Not a single trace. No camera, no clothing, no footprints confirmed, nothing. On March 17th, Rachel's sister Nicole traveled to Bruny Island with a U.S. consulate representative and friends. Police escorted them along the Fluted Cape Walking Track and other areas Rachel might have explored. They tried to imagine her there. Her family believed she would likely have wanted to see the cliffs. But they also knew she wasn't particularly fit and she didn't gravitate towards strenuous hikes. The climb up to the Cape is steep. The descent can be precarious. Would she really have gone that far? In early April, Tasmania police scheduled rope training exercises around the Fluted Cape cliffs, using the opportunity to re-examine areas where a person might naturally drift close to the edge for view. Still, they found nothing. Kingston police mailed 1,500 circulars to property owners and residents of Bruny Island. Photographs of Rachel, images of her belongings, a request to check sheds, water tanks, outbuildings. But there were no sightings and no tips. Her bank accounts have never been touched. Her phone has never been used. No evidence of foul play was uncovered. The coroner would later conclude that Rachel probably died in bushland or in the waters surrounding Bruny Island. But there's no body, no definitive site. No moment that explains what happened between 3:30 p.m. and sunset on March 3, 2011. Only a locked shack, an unopened backpack, a disposable camera that has never been recovered, and a gap in time that refuses to close. When a person vanishes without a trace, what fills that gap are theories. They're attempts, sometimes clinical, sometimes desperate, to build a bridge across the unknown. In Rachel Funari's case, investigators eventually arrived at a conclusion that feels both logical and unbearably incomplete. The coroner determined that Rachel most likely died in the bushland or in the waters surrounding Bruny Island, not because there was proof, but because there was no evidence to contradict it. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no suspicious DNA. A full forensic examination of the shack was conducted. Her belongings were examined. Every neighbor and known contact was interviewed. Nothing pointed toward an attack. Nothing indicated abduction. From a procedural standpoint, the simplest explanation became the official one. She arrived at the shack. She put down her backpack. She stepped out for a walk, very likely along the Fluted Cape track. And something went wrong. The fact that no trace of her was ever found is cited as support for this theory. Those cliffs rise 272 meters above the ocean. A fall from that height would be catastrophic. And below them, powerful currents churn unpredictably. A body could be carried out, broken against rock, pulled under, lost beyond recovery. On paper, it makes sense, but on a human level, it leaves so much unresolved. Let's talk about the leading theories. A fatal accident on Fluted Cape. This is the theory authorities support most strongly. The weather that day was wet. Rain was falling. Pine needles lined the trail like slick carpet. There are no guardrails along the cliff tops. In places, you're within a meter of a near vertical drop. It's absolutely plausible that Rachel, drawn by the view, as so many tourists are, stepped too close to the edge. Perhaps she leaned forward to take a photograph with that disposable Kodak camera. Perhaps her foot slipped on damp earth. Perhaps a gust of wind caught her balance at the wrong moment. And then, nothing to grab. No second chances. Rachel's sister, Nicole, visited the cliffs days after the disappearance. Standing there, seeing the sheer drop helped her begin to process what might have happened. The geography itself offers a brutal kind of logic. Even Rachel's parents, when notified she was missing, instinctively believed she was gone. They chose not to travel to Australia. The certainty of their grief was immediate and devastating. From a statistical perspective, accidental falls in remote hiking environments are far more common than stranger abductions. But here's where this theory begins to thin. Despite extensive searches, land teams, divers, infrared helicopters, cadaver dogs, not a single trace was found. No clothing fragments caught on a scrub. No camera below the cliffs. No remains washed ashore. Nothing. Accidents leave debris. Even the ocean, indifferent as it is, usually gives something back. The complete absence of evidence is what makes this theory logical, and yet eerily unfinished. What about getting lost or disoriented? The bushland around Adventure Bay and the Fluted Cape is dense. In some areas, visibility shrinks quickly off trail. It's possible Rachel left the main path. Perhaps she sought a different vantage point. Perhaps she wandered slightly off course on the return and became disoriented. If she wasn't particularly experienced or fit for strenuous hiking, fatigue could have set in. Rain may have reduced visibility. A twisted ankle, a fall into the brush, an attempt to shortcut the descent. Bushland deaths can be deceptively quiet. A person might seek shelter from the rain. Hypothermia can set in faster than expected in wet, windy conditions. Disorientation can turn minutes into fatal mistakes. This theory suggests Rachel never reached the cliffs, that she remained inland somewhere, undiscovered despite coordinated search efforts. But again, search teams were methodical. Volunteers walked grid patterns. Dogs trained to detect human remains combed terrain. Helicopters scanned at night. Could they have missed something? Possibly. Dense bush can conceal for years. But the longer time passes, the harder that becomes to accept. And we always have to take a look at foul play, although authorities have consistently stated there was no evidence of a crime. Forensic testing found nothing suspicious inside the shack. Interviews with those who interacted with her revealed nothing alarming. No indication anyone followed her. No disturbance in her belongings. Yet this theory lingers in the public imagination. Rachel traveled openly. She engaged with strangers via couch surfing. She met people casually through conversation. That openness was part of her personality. Trusting, relational, adventurous. It's uncomfortable to say, but not every encounter is benign. Could someone have crossed her path on the track? A fellow hiker unseen by others, someone who panicked afterward and concealed evidence? Could her disappearance be the result of a crime so well covered it left no trace? There's no evidence pointing to this, but there's also no evidence conclusively ruling it out. When someone disappears without physical proof of death, the human mind resists settling into neat conclusions, especially when not a single item, camera, clothing, bag, has ever surfaced. Foul play theories persist not because they are supported, but because the silence is so complete. There were no financial withdrawals. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her phone has never been used. What I come back to, over and over, is the timeline. She arrived at the shack around 11:30 a.m. She has lunch. A boat tour is mentioned but not booked. Her backpack isn't unpacked. By around 3:30 p.m., everyone leaves. Somewhere between 3:30 p.m. and nightfall, something irreversible happens. Now her family lives with that frozen stretch of time. Her parents suffered profound heartbreak and depression in the years that followed, the kind of grief made sharper by ambiguity. There's no gravesite, no moment of confirmation, just an absence shaped like a question mark. The official narrative is accidental death, and if I were forced to weigh possibilities, I would say the cliffs are the most compelling explanation. The terrain is unforgiving, and the weather was unstable, but the mystery remains, because there is not one tangible piece of Rachel left behind to anchor that conclusion. No final photograph, no recovered camera, no answer waiting in a file cabinet. Only a woman who loved Pink Floyd, who founded a magazine for young women, who left one phone behind to ensure she didn't miss a job opportunity, and who stepped out into a landscape she believed was beautiful. And somewhere out there, between wet pine needles, sheer cliffs, and cold ocean water, the truth stopped talking. When most people think of travel safety, their minds go to crowded cities, bustling streets, busy transit hubs, pickpockets, scams, long shadows at night. But safety in a place like Bruny Island, well, it's different. It's quieter, more subtle, and it has more to do with respect for terrain, weather, and solitude than it does with crime statistics you might find in a metropolitan police blotter. Bruny Island is, in many ways, what traveler guides call safe. But that label can hide as much as it reveals. If you look up crime data for the region, you'll find that North Bruny, one of the island's key residential areas, scores really well on community safety. Locals describe the island as friendly, neighborly, and quiet. A place where people look out for one another rather than lock doors against strangers. Solo travelers, including women traveling alone, often report feeling comfortable there. There's no pervasive sense of danger from other people. But the kind of safety that matters most here isn't governed by police reports or petty theft numbers. It lives in the wind that shifts without warning, in the sudden rainfalls, in the rugged coastline and long quiet trails. Bruny Island's roads are few and often narrow. Once you step off the ferry at Kettering and begin your journey south, there's little in the way of public transportation. You're left with your own instincts, or the wheels you bring with you, to explore. This solitude is part of Bruny's romance. It's why travelers come, for the artisanal cheeses, the honey tasting, the looming dolerite cliffs, and white beaches that stretch toward forever. But solitude can also be deceiving. There's no heavy traffic at night, no throngs of tourists in high season either. Just open sky and long trails that slip into bushland. The island's wild heart, South Bruny National Park, is celebrated for its dramatic landscapes and biodiversity, from wallabies and penguins to orchids and she-oak forests. But national parks are not curated gardens. They are ecosystems that operate on their own terms. And that means two important things for safety. First, nature doesn't have good cell reception. Most of the island has great views and spotty phone coverage. Not no coverage, but unreliable coverage that can vanish when you need it most. Second, weather rolls in fast. Tasmania's coastal climate is famous for unpredictability. One moment the sun is high, the next you're wrapped in rain and wind. When walking trails, even well-marked ones like the Fluted Cape Track, conditions can shift rapidly. Soles slip on wet pine needles, paths become slick, and cliffs that offer postcard-perfect views also offer unforgiving drops if you stray from the trail. Unlike urban crime warnings that tell you to watch your wallet, the island's safety warnings are about preparation. Checking park closures and trail conditions before you go, letting someone know where you're headed and when you expect to return, and bringing appropriate equipment. Food, water, sturdy shoes, a waterproof jacket, perhaps even a map and compass. Tasmania police and rescue teams across the state often emphasize this kind of preparation after incidents where unprepared walkers have become lost or stranded. In other parts of Tasmania, tourists have needed rescue simply because they relied too heavily on phone maps, didn't carry extra supplies, or didn't plan for changing weather. This isn't to scare you. If you're alert, curious, and humble in the face of the natural world, Bruny Island is the kind of place that will fill your senses and slow your breath. But safety here isn't passive, it's active. It's reading the sky before you step onto a trail. It's telling someone where you're parked before you wander away from the shack or the beach. It's packing extra snacks, a first aid kit, and enough water to make a walk feel less like a gamble and more like an experience. Now let me say it again. The island is beautiful, serene, wild, and welcoming. But isolation doesn't equal safety. There are no crowds to witness a misstep, no patrol cars on the trails. If something goes wrong, it's often up to you first to notice, then to act. So when you wander Bruny, wander with respect. Respect for the land, respect for its moods, respect for its quiet, and for the fact that what makes this place special, its solitude, dramatic coastlines, remote trails, is exactly what demands your preparation. Travel here thoughtfully, walk here mindfully, and remember that safety on Bruny Island isn't just about avoiding danger. It's about honoring the scale and mystery of a place that humbles all who come seeking its beauty. Rachel Funari was 35 years old when she disappeared. 35. Old enough to have built a life across continents. Young enough to still be chasing new chapters. She was last seen on Bruny Island on March 3, 2011. If you try to picture her that afternoon, here's what we know. She was about 5 feet 4 inches, medium build, olive skin. A strong American accent that likely softened conversations with strangers and marked her as someone from far away. She was wearing a bottle green full-zip polar fleece jacket, black lightweight baggy pants, brown walking boots, and prescription glasses. She was carrying a Kodak disposable camera, the kind you wind with your thumb after each photo. Somewhere out there, in theory, is a roll of film that may contain the last images Rachel ever saw. She had a paperback novel with her, a small black clutch-style shoulder bag with a thin strap containing her cards, papers, and a single house key, and an older-style mobile phone tucked inside a multicolored sock cover. If you were on Bruny Island on March 3, 2011, if you hiked the Fluted Cape Track that afternoon, if you passed a woman in a green fleece jacket speaking with an American accent, think back to that time. Small details matter in cold cases. You can contact Tasmania Police or your local authorities and reference the disappearance of Rachel Funari, March 3, 2011, Bruny Island. And remember, if you share this episode, you extend her name a little further into the world. You reopen the possibility that someone, somewhere, remembers something they didn't realize was important. Cases like Rachel's only fade when we stop speaking about them. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod. and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. It's patreon.com/thelasttrippodcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.